Where are you?
I am in Toronto, Canada.
All right. It's a
And
little chilly.
yourself?
Uh, I right now I'm at my in-laws' house in Monterey Bay area.
That's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
Toronto gets really cold, but knock on wood, it's been 3 weeks. It's been pretty nice for us. It's been like 0 degrees, and we haven't had a major snowfall in like almost a month. So far so good.
I think there's a big storm just south of you, right? That's coming through, but you guys are missing it,
We're
right?
kind of missing it, yeah. Yeah, even last week there was one that hit the eastern part of Canada, Nova Scotia. They had 150 centimeters of snow. Yeah. Like all the way, like you open the door and it's snow. Your cars are buried underneath it. And they do get something like that every 4 or 5 years anyways, but just because they're right on the eastern side of Canada, so far east of North America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a naive Californian, so I know nothing about that.
Where are you from originally in California?
Well, I grew up in LA,
LA.
and then went to school in the San Francisco Bay Area where I now live. Lived our whole adult life up there. So it's been
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no,
Enjoy.
I love San Francisco. I don't necessarily come to the downtown much often,
Yeah,
but more in the Redwood City, Santa Carla, or San Mateo and San
yeah.
Jose and all that stuff.
The
It's
South Bay,
nice.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice. Well, good.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for working on Masters of the Year. One of the things that is, I mean, everything in any project or any series is so pivotal and important, but I think talking about Masters of the Year, the most important part for me was, and a lot of people, because you see all these discussions where some people are not happy, but majority of people are happy, are the visual effects,
Right.
right? And to me, I've talked to Captain Dale Dye, who was the consultant. I've talked to Colleen Atwood. I've talked to Richard Rutowski, I think his last name is. He was a cinematographer.
Towski. Yeah.
Itowski, yes, and one of the editors, Spencer, and I'm speaking to a few other people. And in one of those conversations, I talked about the visual effects very briefly, just to kind of give you a little bit my perception, and then we can go into the conversation and questions. Is that what I loved about the visual effects was no matter where you are in the plane, right? And it's a very tight space when you're flying it, and even if it's a model, and you have all these windows, right, on the front and on the kind of halfway on the sides,
Mm.
you would see every intricate detail from a cloud, to a smoke, to a plane flying by or a bunch of planes flying by, which was great. But the one that stood out for me the most, which I was like, wow, like this is like amazing. And it's a very simple thing. There's a scene in one of the episodes where the plane lands into a field
Yeah.
and you see the fields like just through the side window, just flickering back and forth, back and forth. Now, I don't know if it was, real or if it was like some sort of bushes
Like a
like kind of just set it there, yeah, like a reference point. But
yeah.
it still looked amazing, the movement, the way the plane was landing and moving. I was just blown away by that. That to me defined the visual effects of the entire series. So just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that before you begin.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. Yeah. We just as a sort of a how we approach the work, everything interior. So if you're we had a a B-17 set, but we broke it up into different compartments. So if you're we had like a nose and a cockpit compartment
Right.
set. We had a waist gunner compartment set. We had a tail gunner compartment set and a ball turret and top turret as individual sets. So that made it more manageable in terms of how to shoot the actors. Um, but all of that was typically 99% of the time was put up on a motion base of some sort. Now I can talk a little bit about what those were on a
Please.
stage. And so the for example, you had the cockpit and the nose compartment on a 10-ton motion base. So it was a 6-axis motion base, if you can imagine. So it could tilt, roll, pitch, as well as twist and heave and so forth. So it allowed us to have a lot of interaction in terms of the flying sequences, from generic, just flying vibration, which is a subtle thing that I think a lot of shows miss out on. It certainly helps the actors in terms of feeling like, they're in this massive um, uh, aircraft that has this vibration. If you've ever seen, you can go onto YouTube and listen to some of the coverage that they've done, or see some of the coverage they've done of flying real P-17s. It's this giant shaky structure, right? There's just this vibration and this sound, this droning sound that happens. And so starting with sort of the baseline vibration, culminating to sequences where they're having they're being attacked by flak. So for example, if there's a flak explosion off the port side pilot window, the motion base could react to that explosion. So it
Mm.
will actually buffet the plane. So then the actors react, and then simultaneously you had all this stuff that's dangling in the background moving. So there's not much that's really dangling, but you do have things like oxygen tank cables and so forth that you see move when they jostle and so forth. So that adds a lot of element of realism to their performances, and just the general look of it. But all those shots in across the 9 episodes that we shot, interiors, were all done on the stage with the motion base against a giant LED wall. And we chose to do that just principally because it makes for a more cohesive performance, again, culminating to that. And I can talk about that in a second, but just to answer your question, coming back, everything out the window was ultimately computer generated. So we didn't have the ability to go, I mean, as much as we really wanted to, it's just not realistic to take a real B-17 up in the
Yeah.
air these days.
Yeah.
Not just for cost. If people think about the insurance, if you're putting a whole crew on a B-17, if God forbid something happens. And of course, there was that calamitous accident that happened at the Dallas Air Show
Right.
not too long ago. Things like that just say, we're just going to do the sets, interior, and then everything outside will be visual effects. So when you see the bell, I think you're describing the belly landing scene where
Yes.
Brady coming in, and he's descending very quickly adjacent to the runway, which is what they did. They had these big open fields, and they would just slide essentially to a stop. It's quite dramatic. That's all computer generated. So we have one shot you might recall where it's sort of the co-pilot's POV. He looks out at the Thorpe Abbott control tower and some of the ground crew that's down there getting ready to rush out to them. That's all fabricated as visual effects. So we would we created the whole Thorpe Abbott environment and placed it into the shot. So all you're seeing that's traditional shooting, photography, was the interior environment, and then everything out the window is us. So coming back to the LED, what allowed the actors to really sort of lift their performances were just that. We had a proxy version of Thorpe Abbott. They could see, that we ultimately replaced everything, most of it,
Right.
not all of it actually. But if you're looking outwards towards the window, and the camera's looking out that direction, and you see the control tower, let's say you're over the shoulder of a pilot, we usually replace that, and that's all computer generated. But the actors had the benefit of a proxy version of that environment, so they could see, oh, there's the control tower, oh, there's the field,
Yeah.
oh, when they're up in the battle, oh, there's a BF-109 coming straight at me, I can see it, and there it goes. And all the eye lines work, and the interaction, the interactive light explosions, and so forth. So it sort of elevated, again, the realism of the performance. So that was the main impetus. Traditionally, prior to that, it was blue screen or green screen work, which
Yeah.
made for really nice mats for visual effects, but didn't make for a great performance from the actors. It was usually like, you probably have seen this. It's
Oh yeah,
usually
yeah.
some geek like me holding an eyeline pole saying BF 109, kind of like with a pole and a tennis ball at the end of the stick saying that tennis ball is your plane. Follow that. Oh, it's coming at you. It it doesn't make for the best performances. So, having the wall being able to project, real proxy planes coming at you and understand, where they are spatially, and again, the interactive light. It also made for, the camera composition to be that much more realistic, because the camera, the people operating the cameras could understand, oh, there's a plane. I need to pan left and catch that, as it swings by. So it really helped a lot. Anyway, I'm rambling. Go ahead.
No, no, no. That's just please don't think that. It's amazing the information that you're giving. It's awesome because being in the industry myself, and I know that how like one thing I don't know if an average moviegoer notices it. I certainly do. I know friends who do who are in the industry, is that forget about visual effects. There are movies out there, a lot of movies where you sh do pick up shots of two characters interacting with each other without the other one even physically there because of schedule conflicts, right? And
Yeah.
there's a prime example of there was a movie came out in the late 90s, I think, called Red Planet with Val Kilmer and Tom
Classic.
Sizemore. You,
Yeah.
you know about and how there was a whole story that Val Kilmer and Tom Sizemore really did not get along with each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they filmed all of their scenes
Yeah.
separately. And
Yeah.
I mean it literally shows when that chemistry of physicality is not there, whether it's another character or the physical space like you're talking about, it
Yeah.
comes across on camera. I notice it. I'm sure you notice it. I don't know if
Yeah.
an average moviegoer notices it, but it's so evident. And I'm so glad that you guys did what you did with this because having that, eye line and that reference point is so pivotal that you can tell. You can tell in a snap.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially with fast moving action, right? So, an FW 190 is like here in 1 second, and then another second it's over here, or, so you have to, there's no way you can recreate that physically, certainly, with an eyeline pole or something, or even just telling the actors, well, look fast, they're never looking in the right place. So,
Yeah.
we made it easy for them, and they loved it. They gave them perfect opportunity to just act and not try to imagine what is going to ultimately be out there, 9 months from now.
Yeah. So tell me about this. So, you said most of it, what was outside the window, if not all of it, was visual effects that were the LEDs were the proxies, right?
Yeah.
So in the sequences where you see other planes coming in or, gunshots or whatever in the sky, the clouds, they were on the LED, right? But in order for them to be LED, they had to be created.
Yeah.
So how was that sort of workflow where you guys had to figure out from a storyboard standpoint that we got to create these shots, these planes moving, on the sides or coming in or the fire coming in, and then making sure that it's again replaced by something similar, if not the same thing?
Yeah. I mean, the general workflow for visual effects is pretty typical throughout, but for me, I'm a big previs guy. So, what it always starts with the scripts, certainly. In this case, we had these amazing tome, essentially, of scripts and historical references from John Orloff. So he has a research Bible that he created. It's like 250 pages long or something like that.
Wow.
Uh, so I had this baseline to start with. Because you imagine you're coming into the show. It's funny because and I'm sure I'm going to get grief about this, but growing up, I was a kid. I was a cars kid. When you're growing up, you're either like cars or airplanes, and I was a cars kid.
Of course.
Yeah, I had to learn everything about airplanes as quickly as possible. So, this was certainly the baseline for historical references, and what were our characters in the in the series, um, and how to, how do they interact and so forth. So John's research Bible was critical for that. Then his scripts, and then of course, the original book, from Don Miller.
Donald, yeah,
And then you start reading other online stuff. There's an amazing wealth of information online that you can find, and we had some great researchers, helping us. So if I needed to know, okay, how, what was the strategy in 1943 for, the Luftwaffe attacks, and how did that change once they started using, rockets, and then as the war progressed, the formations changed with the B-17s, and what was the baseline formations they started with, and how did that evolve and so forth. So there was a huge, learning curve for me at the beginning, and that, so once I got all that, then yeah, you go into storyboarding, and that's usually done with the directors and some extraordinarily talented storyboard artists, and they're sketching out action based on what they're reading in the script. So, plane flies from A to B, character reacts, maybe there's an explosion or whatever. So you're you're drawing out the storyboards, and basically blocking out the action, for that. And most of the time we're doing storyboards just for action. We're not necessarily doing it for drama, or generic
yeah,
dialogue
yeah,
sequences. There's no need for that, but it's just choreographing action. Once we get there, and the director's happy with that, I take it and I sit down with, a previous company. In this case, it was the third floor, and I had the benefit of working with, the previous supervisor named Matt Smart, and he happened to be a pilot, and he understood, plane aerodynamics, and, big World War II junkie. So he was thrilled to get into this. And so we would sit down with the boards, and we would step through them and talk about each sequence and how to approach things. And he would then wade into it with his team, and then start blocking the action, bring it back to
of
me.
course.
We'd talk about it, we'd review, I'd give him comments. And then once those sequences, were pretty fluid, and we were happy with, the action. And in terms of that, what we were looking for principally was, not just being historically and technically accurate, but also just fun to watch. I mean, this is, an issue I think you see with a lot of shows, where they're so focused on being technically accurate, but it's a big yawner in the end when you're trying to watch it. You kind of have to really think, okay, this is like technically correct, but it's kind of boring. So how do we elevate it so that it's fun? And so for that matter, I think we stayed, I would say 98% true to the technicalities of these battle sequences. Occasionally, yes, we would take creative license, and I can talk a little bit about that. And,
Sure.
I'm sure there are people who are going to go and pound me on it. But like, I'll give you an example. We had some great technical advisors on set with us. One guy, Ty Ramey, he was superb, and he actually runs a B-17 bomber camp. So you can go. It's in California. You can go to it, his website, and you can go for a long weekend and fly a B-17 and shoot, you know, 50 caliber guns. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, wow.
He was there with us, and I remember it was like probably the first week. He comes up to me, he goes, Stephen, whatever you do, Hollywood always gets this wrong. The front of the engines never catch on fire. And he's like, really intense. Okay, Ty, I got it. We can't, you just, there's no fuel there. There's nothing to catch on fire. I mean, technically you probably might be a little bit of oil or something like that, but for the most part, it's not this big, inferno on the front of the engine. Anyway, not more than a week later, we were in a shot, and, we were doing a scene, and there's a shot where we're over a pilot's shoulder looking out at the engine. And of course the director's like, what are we looking at? Let's make it make it go on fire. So
Oops.
so it's those situations where, you're composed for a shot, with a pilot who really is only seeing the front of the engine. You know, they have the prop and the front of the engines, and you have to be showing something. You can't just show, you know, a little bit of fizzling smoke or something like that. You have
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
you know, it
Dramatic.
calls for some action or
Yeah.
something fun to watch. So I would say 2% of the time. So anyway, I don't think it's going to stop Ty from like throwing something at the screen when he sees it, but he'll, he'll go, I told him. But we tried to remain true most of the time. But anyway, so once we get the previs worked out, and we'll sit down with the director and we'll they'll give their comments on the show. We had it's 9 episodes, and we broke it into what we call 4 blocks. So there were 4 sets of directors.
Right.
And in the actually block 2, we had a directing cup 2 directors. We had Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck directing 2. But other than that, there were just single directors on the other 3 blocks. And we'd sit down with them and we'd go through the previs. They'd give their notes. I'd take those notes back to Matt, and we'd sit down and we'd make some corrections and adjustments, and then basically it's just the normal back and forth creative workflow till we
Right.
got to a point where they're happy, and then at that point that work gets distributed to the departments. So stunts, special effects, costume, makeup, they're all looking at this now going, okay, and they understand what they need to do in order to address the action in that previs. And then all of that was then projected on the LED walls. So we brought that into Unreal Engine,
Mm.
and Lux Machina. When just to step back, when we started the show, there was no like virtual production stage where we were going to shoot. This was in north of London, in some old converted warehouses. So Lux came in and designed the LED volumes. We had 3.5 volumes, I believe. The half volume was actually a mobile one. We could move it around. And so they designed it, and then they came in and managed the shoot. So they would take the previs, ingest it into Unreal, and then play it on the wall. And the beauty of working on it with Unreal is that the DPs, and they love this, is that they could come over and they could do all their lighting in Unreal dynamically. So as we were setting up shots, you're in a very cloudy environment or you're a sunny environment. They could position the sun wherever they wanted. They had a big explosion. They could cue it however they wanted based on what they were shooting at the moment. So the director could go and explosion, and the Unreal operator could then add an explosion, which would give interactive light to the actors. So it was all, again, all proxy content out the window, but it made for that, that sort of realistic look, and it was highly interactive. It was all real time. So it I think, again, it comes through in terms of production value for when you watch the show. But yeah, I mean, there are little things that we had to think about in terms of making that commitment to doing the LED walls. One was because we weren't shooting a green screen, matting became a problem, right? So we had, if you think about it, it's not just for people who are familiar with matting, you're just layering it, the world behind things. So if the camera's over my
Right.
shoulder, I need to create a mat that then sits the outside world behind me, not on top of me. So you have to articulate, draw a mat. Um, we used some AI tools actually now that could say, okay, we understand what the structure of the B-17 window frame is from any angle, and from there we can generate a mat. And it gave you a pretty good start to it. You'd have to go in and clean up, but there are things that people don't understand, is like, you have people right up against the window, so you have the reflection. And it's not just this, it's this, right? It's their reflection of this side. So it meant
Right.
that we had to then also put the window reflections back into the shot in order to make it look like there was a pane of glass there. Otherwise, if you didn't have that kind of stuff, it would just look transparent and clear. It would look like there was be no window. So things like that, we made that commitment just because we really wanted the performances to be that much more dynamic, to not use green screen or blue screen. And I think it paid off.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I really hope, I mean, all the stuff that you've talked about, again, this is just a small percentage of people about anything in life. We're always complaining about something. When Masters of the Air trailer came out, there was online, there was like, oh, all the visual effects look crappy and this and that. And, until you see the series and you understand that that's not the most important part, it's a story, but also understand that how it was done and
Yeah.
the challenges that people may understand that. So I'm glad you're talking about this. And while we're talking, there's this somebody sent me a question on Facebook on a group. His name is, I don't know how to pronounce it, so his name is Piotr, I think, and he asked me something. I think you asked me, you answered me already, so I'm gonna read the question just so I know that you have answered, and you can tell me if you have to. If not, then maybe you can address it if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, hit
So he
me.
asked, he asked, can you ask how the shots were designed and how, and as John Arloff mentioned, the visuals projected on the volume were simplified for actor reactions and reflections, how the foreground and cockpit shots was separated from the background for the final FX composition, didn't use green screens when using volume. Thank you. I think you answered that, right?
Yeah, I'll try to summarize the answer again, but it's basically we used the proxy content was the previs essentially from that we generated from third floor. So that gave the opportunity for the actors, the camera, lighting, and so forth to react to what was happening outside. Rather, if we had a green screen, you would never see any of that. Again, it would just be like me with a tennis ball and a stick, running around going BF 109, and it just would have looked much more detached. So yeah, it was, and then how it was replaced was, again, traditionally when you're matting, you're rotoscoping, you're drawing edges around the thing that you want to put content behind. So if the camera's here on me, you want to draw a mat that's, an articulate edge, a very perfect edge right around down my shiny head, down my shoulders, and so forth. And that creates a mat that then keeps me in front of whatever you're going to layer into the shot. Now, long ago that used to be drawn hand by, frame by frame by hand. As we started using computers, we started to, the computers, we could do all the in-betweening with the computers. So you could draw, if I'm moving from here to here, you could draw the starting and the end position, and then the computers could figure out all the in-between frames. Now with this AI roto tools we have, we're letting the computer start to figure out those key frame positions. So, if I'm starting here and I'm moving here, it looks at those frames all as one sequence, and you know, with the algorithms that are pretty smart, it will understand, okay, I need to draw an articulate mat for this. And it gives you 95% of that. It's not perfect, but it saves a lot of time. So there's still some handwork that has to go into it, to start layering it. As far as the reflections go, um, we had CG versions of the actors. So I scanned them all, and then we would do CG versions of them. In some cases, we use them as, the camera would actually see them. For example, when they're falling through the sky, jumped
Right.
out a airplane and you saw falling
Parachutes.
through the sky
Yeah.
and so forth. But for the most part, for like reflections, they would just be animated to match the actor's motion. So again, if the actor went from here to here, we would do the CG version of that person moving from here to here, render it from the reflected angle, the incident angle to where the camera was looking. So if it's here, the reflection is going to be, exactly the opposite of that position. And then layer that in at a reduced opacity, essentially partially transparent element that then would be layered on, and that gave that reflection. So if you understand what I'm talking about, like
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
seeing a reflection of something, you're not seeing, it's not completely opaque. You just want to
Yeah.
get a sense that there's something there. And that gives the sense of the window frame, that there is actually a glass there. We also added scratches. You'll see that there's subtle like scratches and pitting on the window. That helps a lot too. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thanks for answering that. And yeah, it's again, what you just said is something I've been kind of saying all over and over again. The detail, the attention to detail is so important in any project, but specifically with this, you know. And one thing I wanted to ask you, kind of moving away from B-17s. Now, I don't know if this episode has been aired yet, so I don't know if I can even remotely ask you in detail, but um, just to kind of generalize the sets of POWs, right? Were there any visual effects used in that sequence to kind of expand the view
Yeah.
of those places?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked about that. It was interesting if you think back, when I started on the show January of 21, we were COVID was just really getting bad, right?
Yeah.
And I moved to England to start prepping for this, and the UK had done something interesting where they they decided, okay, we're gonna try to make a go of this. We're gonna there's gonna be all these protocols. You have to wear a mask. I mean, every day was, wake up, answer something on a website that says, no, I don't have a temperature, no, I'm not achy. And then you'd show up at work and you'd walk up to the security guard. He would take your temperature, and then say, okay, you're good, go get tested. You get tested, a PCR test, get your red wristband, and then go sit in your car for an hour and a half waiting to get the text and
Wow.
go to work. So just a quick digression to explain my answer. So you're showing up at 6 a.m. to just start work, by 7:38. And you get the text and you go, okay, come get your green wristband, and then you can go to work, and you're wearing a mask all day, and you have COVID. We had COVID minders, this COVID team that would, if
COVID police.
yeah, it's COVID police, we call them. Yeah, exactly. And if you got too close to somebody, or you're having a conversation, or the tendency is to pull your mask down a little bit, and when you're trying to have a deeper conversation, and they come over and reprimand you. But it worked. I mean, people got used to it. Certainly there were the occasional outbreaks and delays and so forth as a result, but it worked. But what it meant was that, if you think about Europe, the rest of Europe being completely shut down, we had the intention originally to go on location and shoot a lot of these environments, or build more extensive environments. So that was all off. So the art department, basically had to pivot and build, sets to whatever they could, was reasonable, schedule and cost wise. And so in the case of like the Stalag, the POW camps,
Mm,
they built 4 barracks. And then, so when you see everything beyond those 4 barracks, that's all visual effects, including people. So we had, it's not just the environment extension. Rodeo Effects did all that work, and they did a really good job with it. Um, so it's all, visual effects extension, with digi people populated into the background.
yeah.
But there were a lot of other, people will see, again, just going back to the extraordinary production value we were really intent on adding to the show. And it's not just visual effects. Every department just
Yep.
was bringing their A game
100%.
to it. Yeah. But we had all these locations that we needed to build out. If you'll see episode 4, there's an establishing shot over, it starts low, across train tracks, and the train goes by, and
Yes.
the camera booms up, and it's Paris. Big establishing shot. That's 100% CG. So that people look at that, they go, it's phenomenal. It's not, we couldn't go to Paris and shoot a shot like that because of COVID. So we had to just create it. I spent a lot of time, we had scouts going across like Eastern Europe. Maybe we could, get a piece of it or something like that. And then finally we just said, we're just going to have to create it. So the train, the tracks, all the background cars, the people, and the Paris terrain, including the Seine, the sparkly water, it's all computer generated, done by Whiskey Tree. so those kind of environments, you'll see it later in some of the German villages that we come across, and even a German city that we come across, which is, has very recognizable features to it. People will anybody who studies World War II will know, what city we happen to be in, and that was all fabricated. In the case of the actors moving through, they just art department built a little set, and then we would extend out from there, put the whole city around it. So there's quite a lot of environment extensions that we had to create, just for the sake of not having the ability to go on location, but still wanting to, maintain the production value of, not just staying in, a handful of environments like so many shows end up doing.
Yeah. And again, one of the things that you see on TV series or even films where the visual effects might be really, really great, but just somehow, whether it's the camera movement or whether it's the interaction of the characters, you feel that it's not real. You feel that it's kind of like, um, for lack of a better word, fake.
Yeah.
But again, I don't know if it's my bias, being a fan of Band of Brothers or Pacific and a Spielberg fan. It's just it did like that train sequence that you're telling me about. I while you were talking, I was just like, holy crap! Like it didn't even seem like to me that was real. I felt it was real. And that's an amazing thing to achieve because and that's at the same time quite a scary thing because what's going to happen in the next 10 years, imagine, right? Like, do we really need anything else? Everything is going to be all visuals. Um,
Oh, I don't know about that. I think for me,
I'm just saying, right?
it really goes towards, you know, I think, that cinematic expertise.
Yeah.
I had the benefit of coming up, um, I started as an artist, and I spent many years lighting and composing shots, and I had the benefit of working a lot with Stephen on a number of shows, um, and the I think the biggest takeaway I had or I learned from him was grounding the camera, learning how to, offer the perspective that the audience understands. It's not, too often these days, because it's a computer generated effect, you get these magic camera moves that are, flying from A to B in, 0.3 seconds. And you the audience sees it, and they kind of go, "Oh," and they accept it, but they don't understand why it looks fake. And it's usually because we're there's a sort of the subconscious betrayal of the laws of physics. It's just not physically plausible to
Yeah.
achieve stuff. So if what I learned from Stephen, and I try to impart on throughout this series, is figuring out how to ground the camera. So, whether you're inside the B-17 or you're stuck to the outside of it, you're attached to it. Or your point of view is, if you have to do a geography shot, it could be shot from another plane looking down, or looking across. It has to be like a physically plausible camera position, and moving at a physically accurate speed. So all the cameras that we have are, yeah, the planes are moving at the correct speed. The B-17s are flying, anywhere from 150 to 180 miles an hour. Typically, the German fighters are coming in at the correct speeds, 300, sometimes 400 miles an hour. So there's the all the accuracy of speed and composition follows that grounding position of like, okay, if I were really there, I could understand that action. And sometimes it's just a quick flash, and that's okay. It's like that's what would really happen. You only have a split second to see something, and that really is the point of I think those air battles. When you see a lot of other shows where there's fighter planes coming, and you're on it for 5, 6, 7 seconds. Here it comes, here it comes, here it comes, it's still coming, and there it goes. And it's like that just doesn't happen. They're just like gone in an instant. So for us, it was like important to make sure we were physically grounding the camera. We were physically accurate with our speeds, and then the composition is just a reaction to that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Steven's approach. I mean, to me, there's very handful of directors who know how to use visual effects
Yeah.
properly in the film. Spielberg being one of them, probably the pioneer, I would say. And then Christopher Nolan is another one. I mean, he more so uses practical effects. So does Spielberg, but there's this that integration and marriage of real elements versus, computer generated elements. We saw that in Jurassic Park, the original one that first came out, like
Yeah.
where you see the full size dinosaurs CGI, but anything else where you don't see it in full body shot, it's animatronics, right? Whether it was a T-Rex or Triceratops. But yeah, no, and again, like it's just an amazing achievement that you guys have made. And I really enjoyed the series. I've been looking forward to it for a long time, and having to see it and just feel the excellence that went behind it. From everybody, from Colleen to yourself, your team, to directors, to John, everyone. It shows. It clearly shows.
Thanks. I think people are starting to see now as the episodes come out that it keeps getting better.
It
You
does.
know,
It
one and
does.
two are sort of a necessity in terms of like laying the framework so the
Yeah.
audience understands and so forth. So it was probably the most quote unquote generic of it, but then you're starting to okay, you're introduced a lot of characters, and now you're trying to get into their heads, basically following on and understanding their fear and their sacrifice that essentially that they're making, and then you're in it from three onwards. You're now on this ride with them, and I would say by episode 9, people are going to be really pleased. It was
Oh, they will be. And for me, and this is not trying to take one episode better over the other, just for personally for me, episodes 7, 8, and 6 were the best. Like that's where the plot really gets interesting. Not that it doesn't before. Characters become really like you're attached to the characters way more. The
yeah.
stakes are high. And obviously, the episode 9 was so beautifully done as well. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about just briefly. You mentioned, I think the gentleman's name was Tyler, who has his own B-17, right?
Ty Raimi, yeah.
Ty Raimi.
Yeah.
I would love to have talked to him about it. So he was
He's
in the he
around. I
was
think if you Google like B-17 bomber camp, I forget the exact website, but it's in Stockton, California. You'll see it.
how, how far is Stockton from San Francisco? I'm going to be going there in a couple of weeks. I'm just wondering if I can, not that I know how to fly, just even to go to the camp.
I think it's about an hour. It's
Okay,
not
so that's not bad.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'll read. So he was as a consultant in the beginning of the series,
Yeah,
or
yeah, he was there. He was with us from beginning to end through the shoot. So he was there on set with us every day, and you can imagine, the myriad of technical questions. It's like that's again one of the great things about the show is like, okay, the sequencing for the dialogue between the pilot and the bombardier in terms of now they're on their bombing run. What are the steps, the processes, and just making sure that they're flipping the right switch, that they're setting the speed
yeah,
correctly, and then they're handing over the aircraft to the navigator. The navigator is actually flying the plane at that point. I mean, sorry, the navigator, the bombardier is actually flying the plane at that point. So just, Ty was very key to helping us understand that, the little idiosyncrasies. I remember him, I pretty much every week I'll go, Ty, tell me about cowl flaps. How do cowl flaps work? And you see them open when they're taking off, but it's like, okay, when do they open that? Well, it's right, when they do the pre-flight check, they're going through all their routines. And so it's like, okay, well, at this point, they need to be open until they take off, and then they pull them back, And so it's those little subtle technical details that he was key to.
yeah, yeah. And speaking of learning, did you what did you learn about World War II that you did not know before? And also about B-17s. Like, do you have any interest in maybe going to the bomber camp and trying to learn how to fly one.
Oh yeah. I mean, there are some B-17s in the UK, and we were very much wanting to get up in there, but the production wouldn't let us for insurance reasons. They were
Yeah,
like,
of
no,
course.
you can do that after we're done shooting.
So you
But
do know how to fly? Do you know how to
no,
fly?
no,
Okay.
you can, but we wanted to experience it. So there
Oh, just
were,
pilots.
yeah. So, but I'm still very keen now. I mean, it's interesting because I know pretty much every little detail of a B-17F. The G's are, I can talk about that in a second. But our principal aircraft was the F model. And, to what we built to model full size model versions of them to
Mm-hmm.
use on the airfield so they could taxi around and park on a hard stand and so forth. They had little electric motors attached to them so they could wheel around, but they were not airworthy. They couldn't fly nor move more than really 10 miles an hour. Um, but anyway, um, I I would love to go up, and I mean Ty is always like, come on out and do it. So now that the show has come out, I would love to get up there and fly one for real. There's still some airworthy ones out there, so I'm anxious to do that. We did when we were shooting. I did make a point of scanning some real B-17s. I scanned the real Memphis Belle, um, and there are actually some what do you call them, uh, Easter eggs that I put into some of the shots. If people look carefully in episode 4, I put Piccadilly Lily in there, which
Ah.
he was actually in she was in the 100th, and she's in the background. She wasn't a featured aircraft in our series, but because she's such a famous plane, I put the original Piccadilly Lily because I think there were multiple since. Um, but all the all the serial numbers and ID, marking IDs that were on the plane, they were all technically accurate. I had a there was some guy who wrote a book that has lists every single plane, their serial number, all their markings. So we were very methodical about getting that. So I challenge anybody to find a mistake in there. Um,
Okay.
but you might be
Gonna
able to
go through.
spot Piccadilly Lily as a result of, finding the serial number if you know what the Piccadilly is. So you go, that's it, that's her. Yeah. Anyway.
No, no, that's good to know. That's awesome. Your credentials are incredible. Something that I always talk about in the beginning of an episode, but we just dived into Master of the Year really quickly and organically. I can tell me if I've got this wrong on IMDb just because I'm kind of going over it. Like, you worked on films like Terminator 2, Avatar, Jurassic Park, of course, Hunt for Red October, and Indian in the Cupboard. I remember as a kid that was a huge thing for me. And one movie that came out that I gotta watch again, and now that it just reminded me because looking at your IMDb, Snow Falling on Cedars. Like
Oh
that,
yeah.
I remember watching that, and I honestly don't even remember now what the premise was, but I remember the visuals, and I gotta see it again, and I gotta talk to you about that again eventually if you're up for it, or other films, because that would be really, really cool discussion to
I-
have.
I'll tell you a funny story because you're a Canuck. It's like we shot the Snow Falling in Cedars in interior BC, and we did a scout like in December. I forget what year it was. But it was like perfect. I mean, you're like, you get there and everything's like crystalline white. Trees are just laden with heavy snow, and the streets, the little town that we shot in, um, Greenwood, I think it was Greenwood, BC. You can look it up. Great bakery there. Um, and we were like, "Where's the cameras? We need to, start shooting." Anyway, we came back a month later with the crew, and there had been no snow. If you imagine January in Canada, there was no snow. That's like total anomaly, right?
That's this year too. Yeah.
Yeah. So we were like, it's just one of those moments where the whole crew is like, we arrive at this town and there's not a speck of snow anywhere. And, you could see all the producers sort of simultaneously spin and turn and look at me and go, Stephen, can
Well,
you help us here? So when you see the snow, I mean, the foreground snow was all practical. They brought in artificial snow for like,
yeah,
you know, close-up shots, but everything extended beyond all the following. Everything was all added.
visuals.
It became its own character in the show, but a good
It
movie,
is.
beautifully
It-
shot.
Beautifully shot, great characters, great story that I don't remember, but I remember that it was great when I saw it.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, amazing. I mean, your work is amazing. It speaks for itself. Thank you so much for working on Masters of the Air. Not that, you did it for anybody, but just for the story. And the fans absolutely love the series. People are talking about it online, and it's amazing. And I would love to chat. I really enjoyed this conversation. I would love to chat more if you have time down the road for any of your other projects. It would be
sure.
amazing to have you.
Happy to do that. Yeah.
Great. Anything else
That's
you want to
it.
add?
Um, no, I mean, for me, you touched on something a moment ago about, what motivated me. And it, it was interesting, like for me, again, I hadn't, I kind of had dabbled a little bit into World War II genre on another project, but really this was the first deep dive into it.
Mm,
And I think that for me, and I think this resonated a lot with the crew, is as you get into it, you start to really realize, how terrified these people were, how scared, there's just fear was a huge factor in it, but yet they still did it day after day. They got into these planes and they went out there. And it sort of, to me, it established something in my mind that which I think is kind of timely actually for our, what's going on in politics and so forth in the world, where it's just like the element of sacrifice, knowing that there's something more important that's worth sacrificing, basically setting aside your fear, your anxiety about things, and for the better, for the common good, that it's important. And I think that was something that really resonated with me, is like these guys really, I mean, that you hear the term sacrifice, but you don't really understand what it is until you really start to witness what they went through. And then you ask yourself, well, why do they keep going? And they realize because it's for something bigger than their own self-interest. And
yeah.
and I, that's something that I think really motivated us, drove us, in terms of producing, the best work we could.
So it's amazing that how everyone I've spoken to has pretty much said the exact same thing, that how that motivated them to produce the best work they could. It's going to what you were saying, it's about, the camaraderie that these people have, not just in Masters of Air, just World War II itself, and or any war or any army. It's about the man next to you, right? Like
Yeah,
that's who you're fighting for. And I think
yeah,
that attitude of selflessness that's
yeah,
where you probably get, I don't know. Yeah, my dad served in the army too. He never talks about it, but that's where you get that motivation that it's not about me. Maybe it's about the cause or for the good, but it's also mainly about the guy next to me because I know this guy really,
yeah,
really well.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephen. Appreciate your time, man. We really had a great time, and thank you for all the insight.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Talk soon. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment, and do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.